Hello guys, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to episode 3 of Mystery Week. I really hope that you guys are enjoying this week. If you are, don't forget to hit the post notification button on my channel somewhere so that you don't miss a video this week or in the future. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying this week and you enjoy the mystery videos in general, so that I know that you want me to keep doing them. And let's see how many likes we can get on this video. So I am just going to go ahead and get straight into today's case, and today we are talking about the disappearance of 9-year-old Asha Degree. And this case is so incredibly frustrating. I know I probably say that at the start of like every single one of these videos, but the frustrating thing about this case is that there's literally no evidence, like actually nothing. So this video is probably going to be super short, but we'll get into that later in the video. So Asha Degree was born on the 5th of August in 1990 in Shelby, North Carolina, to Harold and Aquila Degree, who married 2 years earlier in 1989 on Valentine's Day, which is actually very unfortunate because that is the day that Asha disappeared. Asha had a brother named O'Brien. They were raised in an apartment in a subdivision of North Shelby, and they had a very sheltered upbringing. They weren't really allowed to watch TV, especially the news, because their parents thought that the news was too negative, which I understand, but like they also rarely got to do anything social or have any social interactions outside of school, family, and church, and they also didn't own a computer in the Degree household. And of course, the reason that they didn't have a computer is also what makes it notable. Aquila Degree said in an interview that every time they got on the news, there was always something about like a pedophile luring a young child using a computer, so she didn't want them anywhere near her household because she didn't want to take that chance. By 2000, Asha was 9 years old, so she was in the 4th grade at Falston Elementary School. She was, probably because of her sheltered upbringing, very timid, very shy, and very intimidated by social situations. She was always polite, but she was very cautious of everything and was more than happy to stay within the boundaries that her parents set for her and her brother. On Friday, the 11th of February in 2000, the school was closed, and there were reports that this was because of President's Day, but back in 2000, the President's Day fell on the 21st of February, so this wouldn't make sense. And on top of that, there was basketball training that night, so if it was some kind of holiday or public holiday, there wouldn't have been any like extracurricular activities that day. And I read that it might have been something like a teacher's work day or whatever, just something that wasn't a holiday. And on the day that the school was closed, Asha's parents were both working, so they were staying with their aunt Alicia, who lived just down the road from Asha's parents, and I believe their aunt Alicia also lived with their grandmother, Harold's mother. So that afternoon, Alicia took both Asha and O'Brien to school for basketball practice. They both had practice because they both had games the next day at Burns Middle School. Asha's game was before O'Brien's, and she was complaining about an injured leg before the game and during the game, and she played as the point guard, and I read that she was also like the star of the team. So she actually got ruled out of this game, and then her team had their first loss of their season, and Asha just blamed herself for this. She was honestly crying and felt like she let her teammates down. But by O'Brien's game, she seemed to be feeling better. She was playing and joking and laughing with her friends and her teammates, and then after O'Brien's game was done, they all went back home. The next day, on the 13th of February, they went to their aunt Alicia's house again in the morning, and they all went to the Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church, which was in, bear with me, Waco, W-A-C-O. We have a like town suburb here called Waco, and it's spelled the same but with an L on the end, so I'm just gonna go with Waco, but you know, it's probably wrong, just like it is every other time I try and pronounce something. They then went back to their aunt Alicia's house, had some lunch, and they also had some Valentine's Day candy that their grandmother Joanne had given them. So Asha was in a very good mood that day, probably because of the Valentine's candy she got. Their father had to work his second job at PPG Industries that night, so when they went home, they just went home to their mother Aquila. When they got home, Asha laid on the couch for a little while until she got ready for bed. She got in her nightgown, which was like white with red trimmings. She had pigtails in her hair. So at around 8 p.m. she went to bed, and so did O'Brien because they shared a room, so they just went to bed at the same time, I suppose. That night there was also a storm coming in, and at around I think 6 p.m. there was a car crash, so all of the power was out in the neighborhood. But it was back on apparently by the time Harold got home, which was about 12:30 a.m. And when Harold got home at 12:30 a.m. it was also February 14th, so it was his anniversary, and it was also unfortunately the day that Asha disappeared. When Harold got home, the first thing that he did was go and check on the children. So this was of course at about 12:30 a.m. because it was the first thing that he did, and when he checked on them, both of the kids were in their beds still asleep. And then between 12:30 and 2:30 the details are a little bit sketchy, and well, not sketchy in that sense that it's like shady, but sketchy in the fact that like we don't really know what happened. There's a bit of room for debate. So normally when Harold gets home from a late night shift, he goes and watches TV for a while. So he either did this until 2:30, or because it was Valentine's Day, he might have gone out and gotten some Valentine's Day candy before coming back home at 2:30 a.m. And then at 2:30 a.m. he checked on the children once again before going to bed, and both of the children were still there sleeping. A little while after 2:30, O'Brien hears like Asha moving around a little bit, which kind of woke him up. He looked over at Asha, who was standing up in her gown, and then I think she just went to the bathroom and then like came right back. And then a little while later again, he woke up because he heard like her bed squeaking, which he just assumed was her like moving around in her sleep. So he didn't even bother checking. It just like woke him up. And then, you know, when you're like really tired, you just kind of go back to sleep. Quilla woke up at around 5:45 a.m. that morning, which was a little earlier than usual, but it was Valentine's Day, it was her wedding anniversary, and she needed to get the kids up a little bit earlier today because the night before, as I said, there was a power outage, so they didn't manage to have their bath, so she wanted to get them up a little bit early so that they could have their baths in the morning. Normally, she would get the kids up at around 6:30 a.m., but obviously, as I said, she wanted to get them up a little bit earlier this day because she wanted them to have their bath. So she went in to go and wake them up. She noticed O'Brien was sleeping in his bed, but noticed that Asha wasn't in her bed, and she didn't want to panic immediately. She just thought maybe she woke up early, maybe she was somewhere in the house or going to the bathroom or something. So she went and had a look around the house for her, and that's when she started to panic because she couldn't find her anywhere. Immediately she went and called Harold, who then called Alicia and his mother, their grandmother Joanne. He just wanted to ask if Asha was there, to which they said no. And at this point, Aquila hears a car, so she rushes outside, puts some shoes on, rushes outside, looks in both of their cars, but of course, like, Asha isn't there. I don't know why I said like then. So Aquila then calls her mum because she is just like almost hysterical and just panicking at this point. She is freaking out. Her mum is trying to calm her down on the phone and says, hang up the phone and call the police immediately, which Aquila does. And by 6:40 a.m., less than 10 minutes from when she discovered that Asha was missing, the police arrived at the property with search dogs. Unfortunately, the dogs were no help at this stage. They couldn't pick up Asha's scent, which was likely due to the storm from that night. I was reading up a little bit on it, and normally rain would like kind of bring the scent out a little bit more and make it easier for the dogs to track, but unfortunately, if the rain mixes with wind, it kind of gets the scent all over the place and mixes it up and makes it harder for the dogs to track anything, so that was probably the case. So the police just continued looking around the house themselves, and Harold, O'Brien and Aquila went and looked around the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking everybody in the neighborhood if they had seen Asha and just yelling out her name, hoping that she was somewhere. By 7 a.m, a lot of the neighbors were awake, so they came out to try and help them search for Asha, and throughout the day, all friends, family, and people from the church came and started assisting in any way they could. Unfortunately, nobody could find anything, and that includes the police. They looked around the house thoroughly. They didn't see any signs of forced entry, and all of the doors in the house were still locked. So they closed the home and then decided to spread out, search all of the surrounding areas, neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street, trying to find Asha or any lead of Asha. There was not much found on the first day at all besides a mitten which could have belonged to Asha, but Aquila said that it didn't and that none of her winter clothes were missing. But very soon after this, police discovered that her backpack and several items of her clothing were missing. According to reports, the only items that were found missing were the backpack, of course, a little notebook with a picture of Tweety Bird on it, a pair of pants, a pair of sneakers, and do you call a pair of pants a pair of pants? It was just one pant, and also a t-shirt. So because of this, because there was obviously a backpack missing, no signs of forced entry, the police theorized that Asha had left herself. And not only do they theorize that Asha left herself, but they also think that it wasn't just like her randomly waking up one night and deciding to leave. They think that it might have been planned out and that she just planned to leave at this specific time, but they have no idea what her reasoning would have been behind this. And this actually became like most of where the speculation in this case is from. Like, why would she leave? Her parents did not. They were adamant that she would not have just left herself. They could not think of any reason as to why she would have left or why she would want to leave, especially considering her very sheltered upbringing. She just didn't seem like the type of kid to just up and leave like that. She was deathly afraid of dogs. She was deathly afraid of storms and the dark. It's like not only weird that she had no reason to leave, but it was also a really weird time for her to leave. By that same evening on the 14th, the media had latched onto the story, so police, Asha's family, and Asha's photos had been plastered all over the TV. Aquila decided to use this to her advantage and made a plea to anyone that had her to bring her back or anyone that knew anything to come forward. And of course, with media attention also came some witness statements. 2 witnesses firstly called the police saying that they had seen a girl matching Asha's description that morning. The girl matching Asha's description was seen on Highway 18, which is a 2-lane rural road and spans for 145 miles, both north and south. This route was also taken by Asha's school bus, so it was familiar to her, and I guess she would have known where the road would have ended up. And because this road is so long, there are different parts of it. Like when you're driving along a highway, I'm sure you know, there are beautiful scenic areas, there are very boring areas, not very well lit areas. This particular stretch of road near like where she was seen was very poorly lit. There aren't any lights in this section, so it can be very hard to navigate. 2 more separate witnesses came through, a motorist and a truck driver, and both said that they saw Asha walking south through Shelby on Highway 18 between 3:30 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. And Asha's family lived a few miles north of the main stretch of Shelby, so from these witness statements, it was theorized that she was walking into town, considering she was walking away from her parents' house towards town. So it was February, it was already cold, but it was 3 a.m, so it was even colder. And the weird thing about this is the witnesses that saw her said that she was just wearing a white long sleeve t-shirt. And also from what the witnesses said she was wearing, they were able to confirm that the witness sightings were true because they kind of correlated what she was wearing to the items that were missing at her house. One driver said that he was concerned when he saw her, and you know, I'm actually surprised that he didn't call 911 at the time and that none of these witnesses called 911 at the time, because imagine seeing a 9-year-old girl on a cold night that is storming just wearing a t-shirt and a backpack at like 3 a.m. just walking down the highway. Like, I am so surprised that there's like 5 witnesses that saw her and that not a single one of them called 911 until they saw it on TV. And police were able to corroborate that their stories were like adding up and that they truly did see her. So it's just so confusing to me as to why they wouldn't have called 911 when they first saw her, because maybe if they did, you know, Asha would be here. Anyway, this driver said that he saw her. He was obviously concerned, as you would be. He did a U-turn to come and see her, but the storm was so bad that he ended up having to do like 3 more U-turns to go back and find her, and he rolled down the window when he finally found her to ask if she was okay, but she freaked out at this and ran down into the woods. Or not woods, they weren't really woods, they were like, I'll insert a picture here, but you know when you're driving past the highway and there's like all those trees that kind of line up? Like that. Not really wood, not really dense, not really forest-like. This sighting was about 1.3 miles south of her home, just near the junction of Highway 18 and Highway 180, and this is the last sighting of Asha. And for 2 days after all these witnesses came in, there was nothing. But on the 17th of February, just 3 days after the disappearance, and this was on Highway 18, about 100 meters off-road and west of where Asha was last seen, they found a shed which was used by Turner's Upholstery. The shed was located down a long dirt driveway and it was pretty much just filled with like furniture, a tractor, and things for the business. Debbie Turner, the owner of the business, said that on the 15th of February, just a day after the disappearance, that she found some items in the shed, which initially she didn't make the connection, but when police showed up on Thursday and asked if they could search around, she remembered. And I think there was just 3 items. There was a Mickey Mouse hair bow, a green pencil, a green marker, and a pencil. And these were found like just inside of the shed. So police obviously began to immediately search the area, and while they were searching, they found candy wrappers, which they could connect to these Valentine's Day goodie bags, which all of the girls in Asha's basketball team received on the Saturday night game. And they also brought in several sniffer dogs, but again, they weren't able to match Asha's scent. It's been suggested that Asha entered the shed to get away from the storm, and it was also suggested that maybe she was taken into this shed, but neither have been confirmed, of course. And this shed actually raised a few questions as to obviously why she would be in this shed, and also why it took police 3 days to go and look at this shed that was so close to the area in which she was last seen. Nothing else was found in the investigation despite investigators' best efforts. They even increased all of their search efforts in the shed and around the area of the shed. So a week after the disappearance, they called off the search. They were of course still looking into the case, they just weren't searching on foot anymore because they had put in over 9,000 man hours over the course of a week. And despite all of these hours, they found literally nothing substantial, nothing that could bring them any leads, any information, anything to go off. Police theorize, as I mentioned, that Asha ran off by herself, but a lot of people disagree with this. I personally don't disagree with this because I can't see any other option than she left of her own with free will. There was no sign of forced entries, and all of the doors were still locked. But Ben Ermini, he was the director of Missing and Exploited Children, and he said that kids don't usually start running away till the age of 12. I don't know how true that is, and especially at 3 a.m. I feel like that's a really dangerous time where somebody would definitely feel comfortable, like obviously not just some random person. Like, I wouldn't see a kid at 3 a.m. and decide to abduct them, but it's a time, it's not broad daylight, so it is more likely that if someone who had bad intentions saw her, they would feel confident enough to abduct her. I also believe that police agree with the theory that she ran away and then might have ran into someone who didn't have the best of intentions. Law enforcement said it was really difficult to track because normally in abduction cases, the abductor or the murderer has been tracking this person, they've had their eye on them, so they've maybe been grooming them and have left a few clues behind. But in this case, if it was somebody that had bad intentions that just saw her walking down this road, you know, there's no planning, there's no nothing, so there's no clues and it's harder to track. Or impossible to track in this case, I feel. And especially if it's some random person that she had no ties to that just took an opportunity, you can't link it to someone, you can't look for people around her. In March of 2000, investigators had nothing, so they turned to Asha's parents. They had previously stated that both Harold and Aquila were not suspects, but they just asked them to do a polygraph, both of which did the polygraph, both of which passed the polygraph. That's the end of that. I just thought I would mention it. FBI members and the NC State, North Carolina State Bureau of Investigations decided to join in and help and assist with the case. And as well, over the next few months, the Degree family made quite a few public appearances to plead for their daughter's safe return. Any information regarding her return, I think the Oprah Winfrey show aired something regarding it, aired an episode or something in an episode regarding Asha Degree. She was also on The Family was on America's Most Wanted and on the Montel Williams show. But despite all of this coverage, there was still nothing. It wasn't until the 3rd of August in 2001 that the investigators would get their first piece of evidence since the shed. About 26 miles, which is roughly about just over 41 kilometers, north of the shed along Highway 18, Asha's backpack was found. And the thing about finding this backpack here is that it's unlikely Asha left it there herself, considering the last time she was spotted was only about a mile from her parents' house, so this is 26 miles away from where she was last spotted. This 44-year-old guy named Terry Fleming, he was a Burke County contractor, and he was clearing a lot to prep it to build a house on it. While he was using a grader, he uncovered a garbage bag, which appeared to have something in it, so he opened the garbage bag. Inside it was another garbage bag which had something else inside it. Inside both of these garbage bags was a backpack, and this backpack had a note in it which had Asha's name and a phone number in it, and this was about 15 yards from the shoulder of Highway 18. So at the time, this guy Terry had no idea about this case. He didn't know who Asha was. He had never heard anything of the case. So the only thing that made him write down the name and the number was he just had a really bad feeling about it. It was a weird spot for a garbage bag, a backpack with just a name and a number in it to be. It was weird that the backpack was in 2 garbage bags. Just weird circumstances. He didn't feel good about it. So he wrote down the name, he wrote down the number, and the next morning at breakfast, he told his wife about what he had found, about the name, the number, and she had heard of the case and immediately recognized the name and immediately contacted police. Search and rescue teams were called in immediately. They scoured the area but didn't find any clues except for the backpack. The FBI ended up taking the bag into their possession for forensics testing, but they never released the results of the forensic test. They also never released a full list of the items that were found in the backpack. There are some websites that claim it was personal things like her basketball uniform and some photos of her family, but of course there's nothing official that has been released. But what officials did say after finding the backpack is that because of this discovery, they definitely think that some sort of foul play was involved. By the way that it was buried, investigators theorized that the abductor or the abductors buried it in the woods, took it into the woods, buried it so that nobody would find it. But the bag brought up quite a lot of questions, like why was it buried there? Why was it preserved inside of 2 garbage bags instead of trying to dispose of it, like burning it or, throwing it off a cliff, because there was a lot of mountain area around where they lived. Nothing else came of the bag, and investigators, police continue to receive tips, but none of them brought up any evidence. In 2004, one specific tip came up, which we don't actually know what the tip was, that wasn't released, but it was enough for the police to to initiate an excavation. The tip came from an inmate in county jail, and it was about possible remains. Well, I assume that it's about possible remains because on the corner of Shelby and Rube Spangler Road in Lawndale, they began excavating. They were excavating to look for possible remains, but they didn't find anything there except for a few animal bones. In 2015, the FBI announced that some FBI investigators, some Cleveland County Sheriff's Officer investigators, and that the State Bureau of Investigations were re-examining the case. They were interviewing witnesses again, again, they put up a $25,000 reward for any information that led to an arrest, and the locals also raised enough funds to also put $20,000 towards this, so it ended up being a $45,000 reward for any information that led to an arrest. But despite the reinvestigation and despite the award, nothing. Like I said, how incredibly frustrating is this case? There is nothing. It wasn't until May 2016 that investigators finally released their first new bit of information since the discovery of her backpack almost 15 years earlier. The FBI released a statement saying that they had new evidence from a new witness that had come forward. They had seen a girl matching Asha's description getting into a dark green car on Highway 18 right near where she was last seen. The car was said to be either a late 70s Ford Thunderbird or a Lincoln Mark IV, both of which were very similar in style. The FBI stated that the vehicle was now a vehicle of interest and apparently had been occupied twice on the day of Asha's disappearance. The vehicle has never been found, and honestly I'm not surprised because this came out 17 years after the disappearance. I'm so confused as to why someone would come out 17 years after somebody's disappearance to give new evidence. Anyway, it's 17 years after her disappearance. You know, they probably sold the car, or they probably got rid of the car somehow. 17 years is a really long time to have the car, so I think it would be optimistic to hope to find it. So that is actually all of the evidence, if you could even call it evidence. I feel like I didn't tell you guys anything because there really is nothing. So let's go ahead and talk about theories now. The first theory is that Asha was sleepwalking, and sleepwalking apparently is not uncommon, especially in children. And it's actually crazy what people can do when sleepwalking and not even realize it. I've heard stories. Kerry has actually sleptwalked before. When we used to stay at his parents' house, one night he got up in the middle of the night, went into his sister's room, screamed her name, like yelled her name, went back to bed, and I had no idea. I slept through it. It wasn't until the next morning that we found out, because his sister told him and his family what he'd done, and he was like, I didn't do that. And she was like, yes, you did. You turned my light on and I was telling you to get out, but you wouldn't. And he was like, I didn't do that. I don't remember. It's weird. So this theory suggests that Asha got up, got out of bed, got dressed, because as I said, when O'Brien saw her and when she went to bed, she was wearing a robe, but when she was spotted, she was just wearing a t-shirt and some pants. And she got up, got out of bed, got changed, grabbed her backpack, left, locked the door, walked a mile before being spotted, and at some point when she was walking, she woke up, whether that was when this truck driver or this person called out to her and she freaked out, ran into the woods. Maybe this person calling out to her woke her up, and that's why she freaked out, because she had no idea what was going on, where she was. So she ran down into the woods, or maybe ran down into the shed for some shelter, because as I said, she was scared of the dark and she was scared of the storm. So she woke up and was like, oh my goodness, was just totally overwhelmed. Or maybe she was discovered by an abductor on her walk. Another possibility is that while sleepwalking, she walked onto the road at some point and was the unfortunate victim of a hit and run, and this person who hit her maybe freaked out, didn't know what to do, and so they hid her body. The hit and run doesn't really make sense to me, because I feel like there would be some sort of sign, like something left behind on the road, maybe some blood. If it was enough of a hit to have killed someone, I feel like there would have been blood or something like that. So that doesn't really make sense to me. And the sleepwalking theory, while I don't personally believe it, I think it is a massive theory online. The next theory is, of course, that Asha left herself, which is the theory that police believe and have believed since the very beginning of the disappearance. The main evidence for this is her backpack. They believe that she packed it prior to that morning, preparing for that morning to leave. And even if she didn't pack it prior to that morning, even if she did pack it that day, I still think it is a huge piece of evidence that she obviously left herself. In class, her whole class was reading this book called The Whipping Boy, which was by Sid Fleshman. I I already know I didn't say that right. This book involves two characters running away and dwells a lot on their adventures after they've run away. Some people actually believe that she was inspired by this book and that she wanted to go on an adventure like the characters in the book, so she packed her bag and planned to kind of live the story out. I mean, this could be possible because she lived a very sheltered life, so maybe this book made her feel like she was missing out on something and that she wanted to feel the way or experience the things that the characters in these books were feeling. I honestly feel like the sheltered kids are the kids who end up rebelling the most because they want to experience things that they haven't experienced, so they kind of experience them all at once when they realize. I don't know if realize is the right word, but she was only 9 years old, so I feel like she wasn't probably old enough to realize that she was very sheltered and that she was missing out on a lot. And on top of that, she seemed to be fine with living her life. Like, she didn't push her parents' boundaries, she didn't really do anything at school. Like, she was very happy to abide by the rules that her parents had set for her. She had never really shown any signs of rebellion or anything like that. Experts also chipped in and said that it usually takes more than this for a child to run away. They say that it usually takes a child to be running away from something, whether that is a shitty family situation, whether that is something at school, or, you know, an incident that happened, or a specific person. Some people spoke about the basketball game and how maybe that triggered it. I honestly don't feel like that was a big enough event to warrant her running away, especially considering she got over it pretty quickly and, you know, was laughing, playing with her basketball friends. It is possible that something else was going on. Maybe there was something going on at school, people teasing her that we didn't find out about. Maybe something was going on at home and she had, you know, not a good home life. Someone at home was, I don't know. I haven't heard any reports of any of this, but maybe there was something else going on. Another thing to factor into this theory is not only that she didn't like to push her parents' boundaries, but that she was deathly afraid of dogs, which made her very scared to leave the house alone. And she was also deathly afraid of storms and the dark. So it is really interesting that she would leave at 2:30 a.m. in a storm by herself. So really this theory has the most things that make it the most plausible, but also the most confusing at the same time. Did she leave on her own, or was she maybe groomed into it, coaxed into it? I haven't read anything about that. There's no real evidence of it, and she did lead a very sheltered life, so who could have been close enough to kind of groom her into doing something like that? I still do think the theory that she left on her own is really the only theory. It's just what happened after she left on her own and why she left on her own. I feel like I'm rambling here and going off on a tangent, but I feel like it's obvious she left by herself, but why she left by herself and what happened to her after she left it's obvious that she left by herself, but why? Why would she leave her house at like 4 a.m. in the morning, despite all of these things about scared dogs and stuff like that? I spoke about how somebody pulled over at about 4:15 a.m. to ask if she was okay, and she freaked out, ran down into the woods and possibly into a shed. So what happened when she got into that shed? Was she coaxed into a vehicle? Did anybody see her? The backpack is definitely what makes it seem like she was abducted, because otherwise how would her backpack end up 26 miles away from where she was last seen? She wasn't seen anywhere else. She wasn't seen near the backpack either. I feel like there would have been a sighting if she had to travel 26 miles. Did she maybe get lost and just succumb to the elements, or, you know, got disorientated and tripped over something? And if somebody did find her, how likely is it that somebody who wanted to maybe murder or abduct a child was the one who spotted that? Well, let's talk about this guy named Donald Ferguson. In January of 2014, Ferguson was arrested for the sexual assault and murder of 7-year-old Shalanda Poole. She was found deceased behind Jones Elementary School. And her murder actually took place in Greensboro in North Carolina in 1990. He was found guilty of this crime and he was sentenced to 2 life sentences for it. He was actually found through DNA evidence, and it turns out that he actually knew the victim. He was a friend of the family. He even helped search for her when she was missing. 1 year after the murder first took place in 1990, he was actually arrested for sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl. He pled guilty to the charge of sexual assault of this 10-year-old girl. He was sentenced to 8 years and was released in October of 1997. At the time of Asha's disappearance, this Ferguson guy was actually known to be in North Carolina. He was, I think, in Spartansburg, which was about 38 kilometers from Shelby, and about 140 miles from where Shalanda Poole was murdered. Now, this guy was a lot. He has a really bad track record. In 1989 is when he sexually assaulted the 10-year-old girl and was arrested in June but made bond. In July of 1990, he sexually assaulted and murdered Shalanda Poole, and in August of 1990, his grandmother was shot and killed. In March of 1991, he pled guilty to the 1989 assault and was sentenced to 8 years in jail, but was released in 1997, like I mentioned. Within 5 days of his release, him and a few of his family members were arrested for his grandmother's death, but they were all released due to a lack of evidence. In 2008, he was arrested in Gaffney, South Carolina for failing to register as a sex offender. In November of 2012, he was arrested for defrauding a bank and got sentenced to 1 year, but just got time served. And then in January of 2014, he was arrested and charged for the sexual assault and murder of 7-year-old Shalanda Poole. Between 1999 and 2000, there was no account for his whereabouts, and this is the time where Asha disappeared. And to further this, Asha was actually within the age range and physical appearance that he seemed to be drawn to. So in Asha's case, he is definitely a suspect to many people. I don't think he was ever actually a suspect or ever actually looked into. And that brings us to the last theory, that Asha was abducted by someone that she knew. And that, like I said earlier, I believe that maybe she was persuaded to do so. Maybe a family friend or a teacher or a pastor had something to do with this. I feel like it had to be someone really close to the family because, as I mentioned a million times, she did live a very sheltered life. So they would have had to be close to the family in order to even get enough time with her to groom her or to persuade her, pressure her into doing this. It could have even been like a friend of hers from school or someone from her basketball team, and maybe they had a prearranged spot, which was the shed, and that's why she went there for shelter and kind of took a few items out of her bag because maybe she was there waiting for someone. Honestly, I think this theory is pretty unlikely, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Any theories I missed, any theories that you guys have, or any information that I may have missed, please let me know in the comments down below. I love having discussions with you guys on these cases because you always have the most interesting things to say, things that I didn't even think of. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this case. If you did, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up for me, and don't forget to hit the notification button so you don't miss a video. Hopefully I will see you in tomorrow's Mystery Week episode 4. Bye!